Justin Trudeau is resigning as Prime Minister, Liberal leader, and is proroguing Parliament. And when Pierre Poilievre reacted to the news, he looked like he just stopped crying. So yeah, a lot happened this morning. Luckily for you, I was a reporter in the Parliamentary press gallery for about 7 years, so I'm going to explain what all of that means. Except maybe why Poilievre looked like that. I've also got some, harrowing tidbits about the lessons that Liberals seem to be learning from this whole thing. So stick around to the end and we'll talk about that. But first up,
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
That's right. Trudeau announced his resignation this morning, walking out to the ominous sign that his speaking notes blew off of the podium. An interesting omen for things to come because Trudeau announced he's proroguing Parliament, which basically does this to all existing legislation, committee work, everything. See, prorogation basically means you hit the hard reset button for Parliament. It basically halts everything currently happening in Parliament and restarts it all. So all those bills that you hated or were worried about or loved, those are done. Any committee studies you might have been intrigued about, gone. Now, a quick but very important side note here. There is a public inquiry into foreign interference going on right now. So I reached out to the people who are doing this to find out if this is going to impact the release of their report, which is supposed to be submitted to the government by January 31st. But you guys can all exhale because it turns out that prorogation is not going to impact this and the report is still coming. So buckle up for that. But all bills and committee work have indeed evaporated. The only way to get them back and for them to pick up where they left off is for certain conditions to be met, including unanimous consent from the House of Commons. That means everybody has to agree on it. That's probably not gonna happen. Especially when you consider that the split-second Parliament returns, all of the non-Liberal leaders are going to be racing each other to try to be the first to introduce a non-confidence motion, which is the thing that will most likely plunge us into an election. Speaking of which, Trudeau also gave us the firm date for when prorogation is going to end, which also tells us when the election is likely to happen. He said the House of Commons will start up again on March 24th. Meanwhile, the shortest an election campaign can be is 36 days. So even if the government is dissolved the day Parliament returns and all of the other necessary procedural stuff happens, the earliest we'll actually all be voting is April 29th. So in all likelihood, get ready for a May or even June election. In the meantime, Trudeau also said the Liberals are going to hold a leadership race. Now, the timeline on that race is a little bit muddy, but according to the Liberal Party constitution, a few key timeline-related things have to happen, including that leadership hopefuls have to submit their nominations at least 90 days before the actual leadership vote. Now, I did reach out to the president of the Liberal Party to see if there's any way for them to abbreviate that timeline, but he hasn't responded to me yet, so assuming that this is the timeline we're working with, it'll be at least about another 3 months until we even know who is running for Liberal leadership. That would bring us to the beginning of April, which means that the timeline between a new Liberal leader being chosen and the actual election could end up being really tight. Now, who are we actually expecting to throw their hat into the ring here? We already know some names, like former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, who has reportedly been sharpening his leadership pitch. He is very good at economics, but doesn't have the most riz, so I'm a little concerned about how a guy like that would do against a very populist candidate. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is also a name that has been spat out by the Liberal leadership rumor mill, but she would be a truly horrific choice, because her former party, the BC Liberals, was actually more like the province's ideological counterpart to the federal Conservatives. So that would be quite a wild choice. Following her headline-grabbing resignation recently, Chrystia Freeland's name has also been floated for potential Liberal leadership, and honestly, I'm sure a bunch of names are going to come out of the woodwork that you and I never even thought of. Although I wouldn't be surprised if some serious candidates actually hold back this round, because traditionally when they lose an election, Liberal and Conservative leaders tend to resign, and the upcoming election is heavily polling in favor of the Conservatives. So whoever runs and wins the Liberal leadership now might actually kind of be a sacrificial lamb holding the spot until the next person comes along in the next race. But who knows? We'll see. The thing I really found the most concerning about the potential future direction of the Liberal Party, though, are some of the whispers that came out from the Liberal caucus in reporting from Global News' David Akin. He reported that, quote, almost all of the MPs Global News spoke to believe Trudeau has moved the party too far to the left, and that shift has played a key role in the decline of the Liberals. This blows my mind because it's not true, although it is something that Pierre Poilievre screams about every day. So clearly some Liberal MPs have decided that they need to have their real-life responses in terms of the direction of the party be geared towards tackling misinformed beliefs about said party. Instead of, I don't know, maybe actually responding with bold, brave, progressive policies to the fact that Canadians are struggling with the worst wealth inequality in recorded Canadian history. Poilievre, in my opinion, is eating their lunch because at least he's acknowledging that people are struggling. He just thinks that the way to respond to that is by cutting red tape and unleashing the free market, because we know that when the rich make more money, they totally always share with everyone else, right? But honestly, this is why the news of Trudeau's resignation to me is kind of boring. Like, it would be exciting if Trudeau stepping aside meant that the Liberals were planning to rise and meet the moment right now. In a world facing the rising threat of the far right, post-truth populism, and the rich hoarding all the wealth like the dragon in The Hobbit, there is a real appetite to hear politicians acknowledge and do something about it. And like actually do something about it, not just acknowledge the problem and suggest policies that will benefit the wealthy even more. But I have a strong, sinking feeling that's not the lesson that some Liberals are taking away here. At least some in the party seem determined to copy the US Democratic Handbook, and we all know how that worked out. I mean, really? The last thing I'll mention here, just to make you all really angry, a reporter asked Trudeau what his biggest regret was from his time as Prime Minister. He answered, and try not to explode with rage, electoral reform. Not that he wishes he had gotten electoral reform done in general, but that he wishes he had gotten the ranked ballot system in place. Take a listen.
I do wish that we'd been able to change the way we elect our governments in this country so that people could simply choose a second choice or a third choice on the same ballot.
It's a confusing regret because Trudeau is the one who walked away from his electoral reform promise. I watched almost all of the electoral reform committee meetings at the time. I was reporting on it for one of my first ever journalism jobs. And I heard expert after expert after expert say that mixed member proportional representation is probably the best way to go. Not necessarily the ranked ballot, which was the one that Trudeau preferred. Conservatives kept advocating for a national referendum because they knew that there wouldn't be a clear consensus for one kind of reform because there's so many different kinds. But then we started hearing similar arguments from the Liberals. Trudeau even said it again today.
I could not change unilaterally without support of other parties our electoral system. That wouldn't have been responsible.
I used to kind of buy this argument, but the more I think about it, the more it doesn't hold up. Like, you can halt any big changes if you demand that Canadians understand the nuances and nitty-gritty of every aspect of that change and have an overwhelming consensus on what to do. And you can argue the Liberals got that mandate because they were elected on a promise that the 2015 election would be the final one under first past the post. So that's why this regret is probably going to make a lot of people really angry, because if Trudeau really wanted to do it, he could have done it. Anyways, as much as we might be in for a bit of a bumpy ride, I do have some exciting announcements and projects coming up that will hopefully help get you through it all. Not only am I plugging away at my podcast, which I'm really excited to be able to tell you more about soon, but I'm also planning to start Twitch streaming, so let me know if that's something you guys are interested in. Until then, I'm going to keep making the daily videos you guys know and love, so follow along and we will manage to swim through this murky water together. What do you think of all this?